networks on Zingo TV channels 250 and 251. Please remember to download both the Zingo TV app on the respective app stores on iOS and Android devices. And while you download, make sure to rate and leave a comment. The app is free. Zingo TV is also available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire Sticks, Roku and Roku Sticks, and on all smart TVs 2016 and forward. Again, welcome. My name is Jessi Sletten, your postpartum empowerment coach, helping you feel confident, prepared, and holistically supported for your unique journey into parenthood. I'm super excited to introduce my guest this week, Dr. Alexandra Stockwell, physician coach and intimate marriage expert, and we are going to be discussing how to rekindle the passion in your relationship after birth. So good morning, Alexandra. Thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm glad to be here, and I certainly love our topic.
Yes, me too. I'm really looking forward to it because I think, intimacy and reconnecting with our partners, especially in this new phase of life, is something that every new parent has grappled with at some point. And so I would love for you to just start us off by telling us a little bit about yourself, your story, your work, and then we'll dive into all the juicy stuff.
Okay, sounds good. So, I am a physician, an intimate marriage expert. I work with couples who are motivated to have long term, intimate, passionate relationships. And I really got started in the context of my own postpartum experiences. I
Mhm.
have been married. I recently celebrated my 28th wedding anniversary. And my husband,
Congratulations.
thank you. My husband and I have 4 children. And
Mhm.
we for due to career reasons and different things, we
Mhm.
had 2, and then we had a break, and then we had 2 more, and we were kind of undecided about the 4th, but we went ahead, and we were both in our 40s when he was born. And the reason I say all of that is that, having gone through the postpartum experience 3 times before, I knew that it was inevitable that there would be a real break in our erotic connection, in the intimacy of a certain nature. And I really didn't want that to happen. We had put
Mhm.
attention on the quality and flavors of our marriage. And I
Mhm.
just didn't want to to, go back to step one again because we had a 4th baby. And so I really began my very um, intentional journey
Mhm.
to learn more about intimacy and passion, and what kind of communication contributes to juicy moments with my husband while 6, 7 months pregnant with my 4th child. And the thing that I want to say is that after giving birth to him, I don't actually remember how long technically until we resumed our usual activities, but there never was a drop in the quality of the connection.
Mhm.
And I think that that is a really important thing for our topic, that there's like the specific activities, and then there's how the connection feels. And sometimes it's really beneficial to decouple those two because it makes both elements flourish a little bit more. I'm realizing that I should have asked how explicit you want to be in this conversation before we start recording. I'm very flexible, and we'll take my clues from you if we want to
Yes.
make this more innuendo or more explicit. So I'll just go
Well,
as you indicate.
yeah, no, I think, this is such a unfortunately taboo topic, right? I think that, intimacy in general is not viewed as healthy in a lot of ways, which is a very sad thing, I think, in our culture. And I'd love for us to kind of destroy that taboo and say, you know what, there is nothing wrong or, you know, it might be uncomfortable and that's okay. We can all face those feelings that we have, when talking about intimacy. But for this conversation, I'd like us to just be open and be able to kind of model that it's okay to have these conversations and it's healthy to have these conversations. And I think that if we, kind of normalize that through this show and through whatever else, we're doing on social media and all those other things, hopefully we can kind of be a part of the change in that. So I think, as long as we're not being too crazy, then let's have a really open conversation when we're having these discussions. So if you're good with that, I am.
I am, and I really appreciate your response because I think that, like, for most people, and this is very relevant to cultivating postpartum intimacy postpartum. So this isn't
Yes.
tangent, and I'll bring it back in, but like most people have exposure to, let's say, rom-coms or,
Mm,
super sanitized versions or of conversations about intimacy and sexuality, or it's super clinical and
mm.
medical and anatomical, which I do think is super important, but sometimes if you go too far in that direction, it could sound like we're not actually talking about what we're talking about.
Right. That
And
connection
then,
piece is all of a sudden gone, right? And that's a
yes,
huge piece. Yeah.
exactly, and it's like intimacy from the intellectual, conceptual, in our head point of view, and I think it's really helpful to have it feel a little more embodied given what we're
Yes.
talking about, and then, of course, the third option is largely covered by porn or other
Right.
sources where it is very explicit, but it has other feelings most of the time,
Hmm.
and so it means that whether we're using a very sanitized sort of princessy version of talking
Hmm.
about sex in the vein of romantic comedies and, you know, inex- not explicit romance novels, that kind of thing, or
Hmm.
clinical conversations, very factual, or porn, all three for different reasons feel like they're inaccurate or we're not talking
Hmm.
about what we want to talk about. So I agree that like one of the purposes of this conversation is to find a way to have these conversations. And I want to say, I didn't talk about sex with my own mother until I'd already had two children. I did not grow up. In
Hmm.
fact, most of my adulthood, I wasn't comfortable having these conversations, but it became necessary both for heating up my own marriage and to normalize these conversations and have them in a way that isn't sort of affected or like filtered with any purpose other than authenticity.
Yeah.
And, when it comes to long term, long lasting, passionate marriages, the only positive predictor is being able to have conversations with your spouse about the sex you're having. That when I think it's 90% of couples who are happy and passionate through the decades are having conversations about the sex they're having. So, or maybe it's 89%, and only 11% are not. And yet we live in a culture, I think this is, I mean, you and I are in the United States, but I think this is true pretty broadly across the world that most people are more comfortable having sex than having a conversation about sex.
Yes. Yes. I would agree with that. Absolutely. Well, and I think, the point of this show is empowerment. And I think that, that covers a broad range of experiences in, the perinatal time frame, right? And so I really hope that this message comes through, that understanding how to have these conversations, breaking through the taboos, looking at our own thoughts and beliefs around sex and how we connect with our partners really will be this feeling of empowerment, and that you do have control over some of these things, right? And that we can talk about how and what we need with our partners, whether it's sex or whether it's, sharing the parental load or, preparing for bringing this new life into the family dynamic, right? There's all these things. And I completely agree with you that the foundational piece here is that communication and building those communication pathways. And I loved what you said about, you started this in your own journey in pregnancy. And that's a lot of what we talk about in the show, is that intentional preparedness is super important. It's never too late, but if you can do it in the pregnancy time frame, you have more of that time, the mindfulness, the ability, the even you're not as exhausted. You're tired in pregnancy, obviously, you're growing a human, but you're not having to attend to the baby yet. And so you can really focus on these conversations with your partner. So I wanted to say that I really love that you mentioned that in your own journey. And I think that's something that I really try to advocate for in the show, is really having a lot of these wide range of conversations in the pregnancy time frame.
Yeah, although it's it's not so easy to inspire people in
Mm-mm.
this way because most people, I think, are focused on if they're going to be preparing and intentional in creating a birth plan.
Yes.
And, after that, it takes a special something to even pay attention to, like, learn how to change a diaper if that's something somebody doesn't already know.
Right.
And, that is understandable. And I also think
Hmm.
like, it's wonderful to be able to have these conversations, and we don't always know what is going to happen with our body, with
Right.
the baby's personality and needs.
Hmm.
It's beautiful to be oriented to the landscape of possibility, and yet there remains this profound unknown until that new baby joins the family.
Absolutely. Yes. I couldn't agree more. I think it's just that, establishing those channels of communication and understanding, how to turn toward one another when those unexpected things come up, or when things are harder than we anticipated, having that safety in the relationship to be able to say, wow, this was not what I was expecting, or this is way harder than I thought it was going to be, and being able to be open and honest and vulnerable with one another um, is a beautiful thing. So, yeah, anyway, but I would love to hear a little bit more about how, you kind of shifted gears. So are you still practicing medicine, or are
No,
you
I don't do
full-time?
any clinical medicine, and I haven't. I've
Yeah,
been a full-time coach for 11 years.
11 years. Wow. Okay. So it was kind of your own journey, which I think is the case for so many of us in this field of, supporting perinatal, during the perinatal time frame is really kind of what happened in our own journeys. So if you could just tell me a little bit more about how, working on your own journey kind of inspired you to start helping others in the same kind of vein of intimacy and marriage partnerships.
Sure. So my husband and I met the first week of medical school. He's a physician and
Oh.
continues to practice. And during basically the first 10 years of our relationship, first dating, and then when we were engaged, married, and we had two children fairly soon thereafter, we were in medical school, we were in medical training afterwards. And it meant that we really did not have much time together. I mean, we had enough
Mm,
time to get to know one another and to be clear on our values and general compatibility. But really, between exams and working 60, 70, 80, 90, sometimes 100 hours a week, there's now a law in the United States that caps working hours at 80, but that didn't exist
mm,
when we were training. And then, having babies and all that that brings. So I just always assumed, and we were having what I call functional sex. Like,
mm,
it was fun, it was fine. It was definitely not what the poets write about. And I did not afterwards feel like, oh, we are so much more connected. It just was
mm,
functional. Like, it was fun, but it didn't like expand my soul. It didn't
mm,
have me feel like, oh, the two of us are like so much closer to one another. It was more like
mhm.
a almost a bodily function with some delight.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, well, once we have more time together,
Mm,
we're so compatible in so many ways. We love one another so deeply. We're devoted to our life together. For sure, things are just going to blossom and expand, and we're going to have new flavors and seasonings in how our bodies and souls feel.
mm,
So now, fast forward approximately 10 years into our relationship. I'm not working any evenings or weekends, and he's only occasionally working the weekend. Before we had our next two children, there are no babies in diapers. Like, we have time. We have time together in the evening. We have time together on the weekend. Yes, we have two young children, but compared to before, we have so much more time together, and nothing changed.
Mm.
And sure, we laughed some more. We had more time to talk and connect. But in terms of the quality of our erotic connection, nothing really changed. And it was kind of like getting hit in the head when I realized, oh, it's not just time that we need.
Mm.
So then I wondered, okay, well, what do we need?
Mhm.
Because I had faith that more was possible for us, although I
Mm.
wasn't really sure. And one of the things, it took me, I wasn't tracking the time. I didn't know I'd be talking about this with anybody. I would have been mortified to consider that. But it was at least 6 months until I had the courage to actually say something to my husband.
Yeah.
Basically, and one of the things I now teach is how to do that. So I was not so
Yes.
artful at the time, but what I say now is to start by commenting on the things that are going really well in your relationship.
Mhm.
Acknowledge how you co-parent together, or how you make financial decisions so smoothly, or whatever it is that you've chosen your home, or whatever it is that's really good in your marriage. And wouldn't you like to have how we are with one another in the bedroom on a par with
Mhm.
the best parts of our relationship? I
Yeah.
didn't know that then. I said whatever I said, and to my complete surprise, my husband said, "Me too."
Mm.
Because
Mhm.
my parents were divorced, my husband's parents were divorced. I always believed we would end up getting divorced, even though there was nothing objective to indicate that. And
Yeah.
I thought, oh, if I bring up dissatisfaction, it's
Mm.
going to be the beginning of the end. I'm going to hurt
Yeah.
his feelings, his ego. We're going to suddenly, it's going to feel like free fall. We're not going to know how to navigate this. It's totally new terrain and tender and
Mm.
complicated. So I just was so scared that we'd end up getting a divorce, and I'd track it back to when I brought up that I thought we could do better in the bedroom. But that's
Right.
not what happened. What happened is that was really the beginning, and just honestly being on the same page about
Mm.
loving one another and wanting to cultivate this part of our relationship. I already felt more turn on and like more
Mhm.
open heartedness, and like there was more aliveness in our sex just by having that very short, simple conversation about wanting to grow together in this arena.
Mhm.
And I started by ordering a number of books. I have to say, I didn't really find the book that I would have wanted, so I've since written it. It's called Uncompromising Intimacy, but it was a
Awesome.
whole
Yeah.
journey, and part of my journey included a really in-depth training in sensuality and sexuality that I did for myself in our own marriage, and it doubled as a coach training. And at the time, I
Mhm.
didn't know what a coach was. I'd never heard of that. But I was very interested in educational models and curious how people would be taught to help other people with this very personal area of life. So I
Right.
went to the teaching lab, and as soon as I was there, I was like, oh, I have come home. This is
Mhm.
the work that I want to do.
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much. I really connected with what you were saying about the vulnerability piece and how that is so scary for so many of us, especially when it comes to these types of really intimate conversations. We carry with us our own childhood experiences, our own trauma, our own worries that we are going to just keep repeating those same mistakes in our relationship. And how that can really be scary to just open us up to have these conversations, even though our partner should be one of those safe places, right? Where we know we can be vulnerable, but it's still really scary to be able to say, here's how I'm feeling, and then to just have that reciprocated by your husband. I'm sure just that connection was, like you said, almost immediate to just be like, oh, okay, we can have these types of difficult conversations without risking our relationship. And I loved that. I think that that's something that I know I've experienced with my own relationship where I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm really scared to bring this up. Or, like what if this is the beginning of the end? Like you said, my parents are divorced as well. And so it's always been that I guess I've never noticed that until you've put it into words, where that's always been in the back of my mind as one of those barriers to that vulnerability. So that was just, I
Yeah,
had an
well,
aha moment.
actually, I was very aware when, like, even the day I got married, that I had like two different voices in my head. One was
Yeah.
full of so much possibility and potential and love with my husband, like it was we were promising. And then the
Mhm.
other was, well, of course we'll get divorced. And actually, when my daughter, my first child, was little, I used to kind of memorize special moments so I could later tell her how beautiful our family was when she was young. And
Aw.
then at some point, and it was many years in, it could have been 15 years into our marriage, I was like, I think it's time to just disconnect from that voice.
Mm,
Now I feel very certain. 15 years in, I thought, it's possible that we'll get divorced, but it's
mm,
not inevitable. And this internal assumption that that's where we're headed, really, it's not helpful. It's just
right.
distracting, and it had become false, which was wonderful.
Right, right. Yeah, instead of the self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Which sometimes can happen if we have that on our radar of, oh, well, it's inevitable that we're going to, break up at some point. Like, then that kind of keeps us from nourishing the relationship, intentionally, in some ways. And so I just think that that's really interesting, that we share that common that common thing. And I think that that might be common for a lot of people listening too, that maybe this is an aha moment for them as well, like it was for me. So anyway,
Well, I'm so
so
glad, and I want
yeah.
to follow up and say that with the utmost conviction, based on my personal experience and also coaching hundreds and hundreds of couples, that having a fantastic relationship is a learnable skill.
Mm, I love that.
This is good news. And
Mm,
really, the main reason that relationships are so troubled, generally speaking, I mean, either, you know, explicitly troubled or just not thriving and
mm,
empowering, as you might say,
mhm,
is because of a lack of education. And I'm very sympathetic, because where is somebody going to get that education if we're talking specifically about how to nurture a sexual relationship over years and decades?
mm,
That is not taught. It's not part of sex ed, if
mm-mm,
one even has sex ed these days. It's only, it's a minority of states that even require anatomically accurate sex ed. And
right.
churches and other religious institutions offer something, but not the answers really for how to cultivate an
Mm,
experience of pleasure and have passion grow, both in the postpartum period and all of the many years thereafter. So
mhm,
I think, really, for anyone who wants more in their relationship, it's not, the first question is not, did I marry the wrong person?
mm,
The first
mhm,
question is, okay, what do I need to learn in order for this to be more of what I desire?
mhm,
And once one really goes far with that, often the partner ends up changing too, because as I change or as you change, we change the culture of our marriage. And once the
mm.
culture is different, then everyone in it shows up more advantageously, unless the culture is changed in a negative way.
Yeah. No, I love that idea of it's a learnable skill. That mirrors a lot of things in postpartum, I feel, because, in our culture, specifically to a more westernized culture, The postpartum period is something nobody anticipates or understands until we're in the thick of it, right? Because we just don't have that model um, of a village, right? Or this community like we used to in the past, or that more traditional cultures have, where they view this time frame as a sacred thing, as something that does not just affect the baby, right? I say so often, like us as birth givers, we often are seen as an extension to the baby during this time frame. We're not seen as an individual going through these experiences or asked how we are developing as a person, after birth. And I think that it's a powerful thing to believe that, okay, learning how to parent, learning who I am now in this new phase of life, learning how to chest or breastfeed if that's something that you want to do, they're all learnable skills, right? And just because it might not come naturally, or just because we weren't taught these things, by our parents or culture around us, doesn't mean that we have to just settle with, oh, this is the way it is, or like it's just something that I really believe strongly in as well, that there's nothing that we can't learn, right? And it is a learnable skill, and there are resources out there. Some of them might be harder to find, or we don't know where to look. I'm so happy that somebody like you exists, where you've learned from your own experiences, you've been able to get training and doing all of these things, and then now we're kind of passing on that knowledge, and we're making that more available for more people to be able to improve their lives and their relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think in order to rekindle the spark,
Mm,
kind of tap into passion in the postpartum period, I think it's really important to even define what we're talking about,
mm,
because it's certainly possible that, a week after giving birth, a woman wants to have sex, but that is very, very, very rare. And
yes,
so the question is, what can happen before she's ready for whatever it was that led to this baby being, well, I shouldn't say it that way, because of course it could be IVF or all kinds of things. So let me
right.
just say that, maintaining intimacy and keeping the spark alive in the postpartum period does not necessarily mean sexual intercourse, and often
Mm,
it doesn't. But I
mhm,
think what can happen is, if we're not available for sexual intercourse as women, then we're not available for any of the
mm,
other elements that are such an important part of a sexy relationship. And I think our partners feel that rejection very
mm,
profoundly, in a way that they may think it's about whether or not there's intercourse or not, but it also has to do with emotional feelings and physical feelings that aren't explicitly sexual. So I think during the postpartum period, just having time to say, "This is how I feel," without fixing anything,
yes,
and also having room for the other partner to say, "This is how I feel," with it just being really understood that actually nothing needs to change, just by being able to bring your experience into the relationship.
yes,
That is enough of a change, and it eases tension, and it has both people feeling more seen and
mm,
welcomed into the next phase of the relationship. So that is one thing. And when having a conversation, it's really important to say what the purpose is. Because if I
mm,
say to my husband, let's say I'm 4 weeks postpartum, and I say to my husband, "I'm feeling so disconnected,"
mhm,
he's going to feel offended. He's going to either think he's doing something wrong, he's going to shut down, he's going to be inadequate, or he's going to be resentful, he's going to be angry. Whatever it is going to depend on his personality. But most people, when their partner says, "I feel so disconnected," in a sleep deprived, stress context,
mhm,
it's not the most generous answer or internal response that follows. But if I say, I really want to be connected with you and
Mm,
find our way back to feeling really good. Are you open for a conversation where we can try to do that? Then
mhm.
my husband's going to be listening, understanding what my underlying point is, rather than responding to whatever words I say that could easily be taken in many different ways. So I think with communication, it's just really important to clarify, you're not blaming, you're not attacking, because you
Yes.
shouldn't be doing those things. You're just sharing how you feel. And the only thing you need afterwards is a hug. Or maybe you don't want a hug.
Mhm,
I just want to know that you know what's going on with me, and I'm interested to know what's going on with you. Just really getting clear about the purpose is
mhm,
to massively improve the impact of that conversation. So that's one thing. And then the other thing that I really want to um, have people know is the importance of non sexual physical touch.
mm,
Because as
mhm.
I was saying earlier, if sex is off the table, many couples respond to that by taking touch off the table.
Yeah.
Or even if, let's say, in a heteronormative context, the husband is offering a back massage, shoulder
Mhm.
massage, because the shoulder get, holding
Oh,
the baby all
yes,
the time,
hunched
right?
over. Yeah.
And but many women will think, well, if I say yes to that,
Mm,
then I'm gonna have to have sex, or I'm gonna end up having to like make sure he knows it's only my like it's just
yeah.
sort of a pain, and it's easier to say no. But we all know, right? A 30-second hug gets the oxytocin
Mhm,
flowing. And sure, oxytocin flowing from breastfeeding is wonderful, but in terms of the oxytocin and connectedness with a partner, non sexual physical touch is so significant during the
mm.
postpartum period. It's a kind of generous touch, not a transactional touch, not a taking touch, but just a caring touch.
I love that so much, and I'd love to expand on that just a little bit because I think the folks that I work with, right, and myself included even, we feel so touched out, right? Like, especially when we are carrying 24/7 for this little baby who maybe is, attached to the breast all the time, right? Or we're just constantly being touched or demanded for our physical presence, right? From another human being. What would your advice be around reconciling that feeling of I am so touched out to knowing you crave that generous touch like you're talking about? Is it about like the conversations that you have with your partner about those different types of touches or where would you say, we could kind of turn to as far as communicating that difference or reconciling that feeling within ourselves?
It's a really beautiful question. I'm sure most postpartum women can relate. And my answer is nuanced.
Mm,
This is not one of these like soundbite moments where it's just very simple. So
mm,
the the thing I want to convey is that when we are touched out, we are using our body like a tool to accomplish things.
mm,
It's like, okay, I have the stroller, I have the bottle, I have my body to make things happen.
mhm,
And that leads to a sense of being touched out because we're not really paying attention to our own experience in our body or
mhm,
experience of our senses. We're using our body as a functional vehicle. And of
mhm,
course, postpartum bodies are incredible functional vehicles. It's very understandable that we would relate to our bodies in that way.
mhm,
But the kind of touch which is nourishing and generative and relaxing is a much more receptive touch
mhm.
and one where we're in our bodies more. It's a more embodied feeling. I Does that make sense? Like what I mean
Yes.
by that is like um let's say I'm carrying the baby
Mhm.
and I'm feeling touched out, but it's because when I'm carrying the baby, I'm really paying attention to the baby
Mhm. Yeah.
as opposed to there's sometimes there are moments with a baby and certainly with a partner where I'm just like feeling the baby on my chest. I'm
Mhm.
aware of my own breathing. I'm aware of just feeling relaxed.
Mhm.
And it's a much more sensual experience, not sexual, but sensual. I'm feeling the touch, maybe the
Mhm.
little sounds the baby is making are just I'm
Right.
allowing them to delight me and just being mesmerized looking at the baby,
Mhm.
how they smell, like it's the way we might look at a rose, right? It
Mhm.
that is a kind of nourishing physical touch as opposed to feeling like, you know, the baby needs to be held carefully and the baby needs to be
Mhm.
upright and, like all the attention on the baby, then yeah, that can be tiring. So,
Mhm.
really, what I'm saying is the difference between feeling touched out and any touch just being too much
Mhm.
versus the kind of touch which is nourishing and has us relax and feel cared for. One of my
Yes.
all-time favorite expressions is mothering the mother.
Yes.
To be able to receive and be nourished, the main difference in those two is our own attention.
Mm.
Now, when we're with a partner, yes, they may need to learn how to touch in a way that contributes to this. And I will say a little bit about that in a moment. But the biggest difference in feeling touched out versus experiencing nourishing touch is allowing ourselves to be receiving rather than giving, which is fundamentally a shift in our attention.
Ah, I love that so much. One of, one of my, like, idols, I guess I would say, during my journey of becoming a postpartum coach and a, CLC and all these things that I've done, one of her things that she taught us, in one of the classes I was in was, postpartum is a time of receiving. So much of our life is about giving, right? And so much of us think about the postpartum time frame as a time of giving and sacrifice and all of these things because we have this baby who can't do anything on its own, right? And so we automatically shift into that mindset of I am in giving mode 24/7. But the reality is, postpartum is a time where we need the most nurturing, the most support, the most just time to reconnect with our bodies, to heal our bodies, to nourish our bodies. So I love that you kind of made that connection of the touch being similar because I think it is something that we have to shift in our own mind and allow ourselves to receive. So I loved that so much. But
Yeah,
yeah,
and
I
I
love.
think most couples, it's new because
Mhm.
there's a lot about sex which either can feel self-centered and
Mm.
self-sacrificing, those two are paired,
Mhm.
or transactional, like fundamentally, I give you an orgasm, you give me one, or
Mhm.
I make this feel good for you, you make this feel good for me. But there's a real art, whether it's sexual or non-sexual touch, for taking your pleasure from the touch. There's
Mhm.
like generous giving touch that the partner can give, and there's also, I think this is with a partner or not, to learn to like take pleasure from the touch you're experiencing.
Mhm.
And maybe this isn't exactly what I was saying, but this is related. Like just how we wash our face, you
Mhm.
know, that is a place that can be functional. Like let's just, or we
Right.
can caress our face and
Mhm.
make it a centrally rich experience. Not that we're about to like, you know, be in orgasmic bliss, but
Right.
we can have like it does not take any longer to just slow down and
Mhm.
wash our face with care as opposed to just like, you know, do it.
Right,
And
getting it done, right.
yeah, and I think that the more we can turn our attention, whether we're touching ourselves in any kind of way, or touching our baby or our older children, or experiencing touch with a partner, that when we just slow down and let ourselves experience it, let ourselves receive it, being touched out is just less of a thing.
Mm, mhm. Yeah, I feel like it's really that presence within our body, and, we're so used to being up here, right? We're planning ahead, we're, "Okay, the next time I need to feed the baby is in about 2 hours, so I have to chug down this food because it's the only time I'm gonna be able to eat really quick. And okay, I'm gonna run to the bathroom because the baby's gonna cry any minute." And so it's very much like living up here and not being connected to our physical experience and our own bodies. And I think there's a lot to be said around that too, because we can have some disconnect around our bodies and some feelings around that after birth, the way our body has changed, the way our body is feeling, as it's healing, all these things. And so I feel like there's this resistance to being in our body, present, and experiencing what we're feeling around us and within us. And I think that I've never thought about it really in that way for the feeling touched out piece, because I've never made that connection until we've had this conversation. And I think that is, it's really an intriguing idea, is that, we really just need to pause, slow down, feel what it feels like to just be in our body in that moment, whether it's a sexual touch or it's just I'm sitting here enjoying my coffee. I'm feeling the warmth in my hands. I'm feeling, the liquid go down into my throat, and it's very soothing, and, just really connecting that mind body experience. And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is, es- it's especially true or true in a particular way when the birth has been traumatic,
Yes.
when
Yeah.
we've had surgery and didn't want it, or there are all kinds of
Mm.
ways in which birth can be traumatic. And
Yes.
with the traumatic element, that's a way in which we like back away from our body. And so
Mhm.
to find our way back into our own body is really the thing that prepares the way to reconnect sexually. Because if we aim to reconnect sexually prior to really re inhabiting our body in a way that includes whatever our birth experience was,
Mhm.
that the sex that comes is always going to be a little dissatisfying because we're not all in it, because we're still dissociated or disconnected in a particular way. And I want to add, it's like part of what we're talking about, that one of the best ways to get the sparkling is to be goalless. Like, if I
Mm.
think one of the causes of real dissatisfaction with sexual experiences postpartum is when one or both people have it in their head, tonight is the night we're gonna
Mm.
have sex, either
Mhm.
for the first time or again, whatever, any time really in that first year, even, you know, like this is what's gonna happen. And so then, if for any number of reasons the baby wakes up, something hurts, one or both of you fall asleep part way, like there's so many different reasons why you might not have a comprehensive sexual experience. And
Yeah.
it's so important not to see that as a failure. And the main way
Mm.
to get there is just to bring more deliciousness, enjoying each moment, and less goal oriented sexual activity. And
Mhm.
I'm not talking about like seconds before the orgasm, you stop. Like that is
Right.
genuinely dissatisfying. But I mean that just like exploring one another's bodies,
Mhm.
just to reacquaint or to really make out with like wonderful romantic kissing
Yeah.
understanding that it's not necessarily going somewhere. You can be like
Yeah.
middle school or high school and don't go to all four bases, just like one
Right.
or two, or
Right.
that having the purpose of sexual connection be sexually connected rather than completing some particular activity
Hmm.
actually makes it more likely that those activities will be completed, and it just diminishes the tension that arises when they don't. Like, have it, if you're going to be touching one another, set it up so that no matter how far you go with that, you feel closer afterwards and
Yeah.
not disconnected.
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much. My gosh, we could be talking about this for hours because I just think it's so important for us to understand like we do have some control in this area, right? And it starts with our own healing, our own reconnection with our bodies. And if we're not there yet with ourselves, how can we open ourselves up with our partners? And I think that that's a really important thing for us to kind of take away from this conversation is reacquainting yourself with your own body, understanding your feelings and how that connects to your physical reactions, and just the mind and body connection, right? And really trying to nurture that with yourself is that first step. I think is what I'm hearing from you, to be able to have that reestablished connection with your partner too. Is that kind of, am I getting that
Absolutely,
right?
and that
Okay.
yeah, that may not sound sexy, but it
Yeah.
certainly paves the way for more sexiness, and if you just
Right.
head back into the sex,
Yeah.
sometimes that works. Like,
Mm.
if someone is listening and they're gonna go for it, but more
Yeah.
often, there's this is another way to describe exactly what you've just said, which is that between when 9 months before the baby's born and then when the baby's born and the months afterwards, you've become a different person.
Yes.
Whether it's your first child or your ninth child, like,
Mhm.
you have become a different person. Your relationship with your body has included many new chapters and phases, and the place where things get wonky is when you aim to have sex the way you had it before, but then there's all of
Mm.
this individual growth, which is not included in the sexual experience, but that individual growth is part of who you are. You are a different person now. And
Mhm.
so the exploration in all the ways we've been talking about is really, how do you bring all of you into your sexual experiences rather than leaving parts unattended to or ignored.
Yes. Yes. Oh my gosh, yes. I talk so much about how we change on a cellular level, right? With each pregnancy. And then we're changing and developing our new identity and understanding or unbecoming and becoming this new version of ourselves, throughout all these experiences. And it's so true that that's going to translate into all the areas of our life and all the connections and relationships that we hold within our for ourselves and with our partners and with our children and all these things. So I couldn't agree more that it's this, um, yeah, that it starts internally, right? And it's recognizing I am a different version of myself than I was before pregnancy, and that's okay, and that's a beautiful thing. And there are parts of it that I might need to mourn because it is feels like a loss in some ways with certain things. And I always say you got to feel all the feels, right? If you if you don't let yourself feel all of them and recognize them, then that's when they start building up and we start having negative feelings about ourselves and our relationships, and aren't able to move past them in a healthy way.
Exactly. I love that your whole platform is empowering postpartum, because we're really
Mm,
talking about wholeness, empowerment, sovereignty in a
yes,
way that integrates all the new recent experiences.
yes. Oh my goodness. Absolutely. Well, I would love to see if you have any other like little tidbits of, advice or ways that, our viewership can kind of take something away and kind of imply to their own, sexual experiences with their partners or just reconnecting with their partners. In the last few minutes here, if you have any other little aha moments to inspire.
Yeah, I think that what is essential for the postpartum mother is knowing what she wants, what's important to her,
Hmm.
and not counting on a partner being a mind reader.
Mm,
So,
yes.
this is true for women at all phases of life, and it certainly is true in the postpartum period that the first thing is really to know what you want,
Mm,
to feel worthy of having it, to receive it.
mhm.
And I want to really highlight learning to ask for it so it feels good to give it to you.
Yes.
And this is true with respect to your partner bringing you more water.
Mm,
And it's also true with respect to any of the desires that you would have when it comes to sex and sexuality. He's not going to know that you need to be touched differently unless you communicate that in a respectful way. So it feels really good to do that.
yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's so true. Yep, communication and how we communicate is really, really powerful. And having that safety um, there built through that vulnerability, I think, like leading from example, being vulnerable, being willing to be maybe the first person to be the vulnerable person in the conversation, it's an inviting bid to your partner versus feeling like, oh, I did something wrong, or, she's angry with me, or, oh gosh, like getting defensive, like you said before. So yeah, I think that that's a really key piece for sure. Um,
And it can
oh,
be wonderful. Like, that's
yes,
my tip. It can be wonderful.
right. It doesn't have to be a chore.
And if sex
Yes,
is a chore or a duty, please watch this all again.
yes, yes. I love that so much. And get Alexandra's book because it sounds like there are some really awesome things that we can all learn from that book for sure.
Yeah, it's called Uncompromising Intimacy, and it is
Yes,
really about communication and presence. It's not about sex positions at all, but it is
yes,
all of the things that set you up to feel more closeness and connection so that the sexual piece comes more easily. Because in a committed relationship where you're living together, emotional intimacy is a prerequisite for really
yes.
enjoying sexual intimacy.
That is so true. Yes. Oh my goodness. Love that so much. So if, folks, obviously they have your book that they can buy. I'm assuming that's on Amazon, or where's the best place
Yes,
that
it
they can
is.
find that?
Amazon and Audible.
Perfect. Oh, yay. We love we love audiobooks as parents, right? We don't have time to sit down and read as often as
And
I
it's
would
not
like.
that long a book.
Perfect. Yes, that's great. And where else could folks connect with you if they want to work with you further or kind of follow your material? Where can they find you on the social channels?
AlexandraStockwell.com is my
Okay.
website, and from there you can find links to all of my social media where I'm pretty active. I have a podcast, the Intimate Marriage Podcast, and also online programs as well as private coaching. You can find all of that at alexandrastockwell.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Alexandra. This was such an amazing conversation. I know personally I've taken a lot from this, had a lot of aha moments myself, and it's just been so wonderful getting to hear your expertise and wisdom and connecting with you. So thank you so much for being willing to come onto the show.
Thank you for navigating such a beautiful conversation. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, my beautiful life creators, remember that empowering postpartum coaching guides new and pregnant moms through the transition into motherhood so that you can bond with baby without sacrificing your own self care. And if this is something you're wanting for your postpartum, shoot me a DM on Instagram. My handle's up here at empowering underscore postpartum. We can chat about how I can help support you through your journey and how we can make sure that you're feeling seen, heard, validated, nourished, nurtured, all the things that we've talked about today, and really starting that personal journey so that you can be connected to your baby and your partner in the most vulnerable and beautiful way. And remember that this show can also be heard on the Spanglish Radio Network. Please check out spanglishworld.ca for all the news and programming. Spanglish World, watch it, hear it, read it, download it, and live it. And thank you again. I really appreciated our conversation, Alexandra. This was wonderful.
Thank you as well, Jessi.
Thank you. And we'll see you all next week.